Welcome to the latest episode of Leading at LEGO podcast. So this podcast, as hopefully every listener is beginning to recognize, is a great chance for colleagues who are interested in leadership and leadership topics to connect and reflect about what it means to lead at LEGO. And leadership comes in many forms, many facets, and today we're going to talk about self-leadership and self-management. And we have a remarkable colleague with us today, Morten Bonde, who is a senior art director in PMD. And Morten, not only being a fantastic creative colleague of ours, has also demonstrated incredible self-leadership and self-management under what most of us would consider pretty tough conditions. Morten was diagnosed with a genetic eye disorder that has already dramatically reduced his visual capacity and will eventually lead to blindness. So we're going to explore Morten's journey, which is absolutely inspiring, and I'm sure a lot of people will benefit from your experience. So welcome, Morten.
Thank you very much.
So let's kick off with maybe just share how long you've been at LEGO and talk a little bit about your first role.
Yes, I've been with the LEGO Group for 9 years now. Was hired back in August 2009. And I was hired as an art director. And I remember being told that I was going to take on the global Christmas campaign. And that was really exciting. So I worked on that project for a couple of months, and then I was promoted to senior art director.
You know, a question I like to ask the guests at the beginning is to share a key leadership moment. And I think you've got a very unique and special one.
Yeah, it's actually a couple of years ago. I think it was back in 2016. I was really stressed out. I was depressed, and I actually was on a sick leave, and I didn't really know why. That was the funny thing, because I didn't know how progressed my visual loss was at that moment. So when we learned that I only had actually 4 degrees of vision left, I was thinking to myself, well, I can't be working here. I can't do what I'm supposed to do. All of a sudden, I just realized that I'm visually impaired, and that actually was a key moment with my leader at that time, Vivi, and she really just supported me 100% and said, "Well, there's so many things you can do. You can still you're a skilled storyteller, and you can write stories, and you can do so many things." So I actually owe it a little bit to her that I kind of looked into myself and said, okay, maybe there's something that I actually can do, even though I'm losing my vision. So that was important.
And what lesson do you draw from how Vivi reacted and how, as a leader, she supported you in that situation?
Well, basically, she just trusted me, and she put trust in she believed that I could do something. And that was really important, because that belief at that point was the only belief I had. I didn't have any belief in myself. So she really stood in there and helped me through that whole process. So that was, I think she knows I'm really grateful, but then maybe she will know now when she hears this.
Well, that's a powerful call out to Vivi, and as certainly truly living the value of caring, and it's super powerful. So it's great, and hopefully she'll be listening to this. So thanks, Vivi, for inspiring all of us. So Morten, let's talk about a little bit about how you reacted to your diagnosis, and how that made you change how you lead yourself or how you manage yourself. So at 28, you were diagnosed with this eye condition that is slowly making you blind.
Yeah.
And as I understand it, as you shared, there's no cure. So the diagnosis is what it is. So how did that diagnosis impact you, and then how did it influence your daily life?
Well, back when I was diagnosed when I was 28, I was shocked. Of course, it was we didn't see it coming, and it was basically I was a wreck that when I learned about it, but I actually decided just to ignore it. It was maybe not the wisest decision at that moment, but I wasn't that impacted by the visual impairment at that moment. So I basically just said to myself, this disease should not prevent me from doing anything that I want to do. So I just kept on going and going and going. And I think that over the years, of course, I gradually lost the vision, but I really didn't pay attention to it. I didn't acknowledge it. So I refer it as I was just pushing a big pile of, mess in front of me. And eventually the pile was so big that I couldn't push it anymore. And I think that I created a inner voice in my head, an inner critic that constantly was, picking on me, saying, "Why can't you do this? And why aren't you as good as the others?" So I was really tough and hard on myself until it, basically I ended up being depressed and stressed, and I couldn't do anything anymore. And that was back in 16. And I think the most important lesson from that experience, and I value it today, because I wouldn't be what I am today if I didn't have that experience. But it was simply that being in denial and not acknowledging what is not a way to live in any way.
Yeah, and I think I'm sure your story is something that a lot of us can relate to in our own way. Of course, you're dealing with a condition that most of us don't have to relate to, but the insidious nature of the inner critic, I think many of us have that and tend to beat ourselves up for sometimes things that are beyond our control. So how did you, at what point did you recognize that, okay, you're in a dark place and this isn't healthy and productive for you, and how did you manage to get out of that space? How did you lead yourself? How did you manage yourself out of it?
Yeah, there was actually a specific moment, and that was when I was sitting in the commune, I think it's municipality it's called.
Yeah.
And I was basically discussing how my retirement plan should be. I was confronted with the possibility of receiving a flex job, and that's where you have a part-time position. And then I think the people around the table were talking about paragraphs and legal stuff, and all of a sudden I just had this moment where I just said to myself, what am I doing here? I felt that I was sort of being pulled to that table by, caring people who really wanted the best for me, but I was never encouraged to grow beyond myself. It was just, this is the possibility for you, is to retire. And I just all of a sudden asked a really important question to myself, and it is, what is it that you want to do with your life, Morten? And I had never, I hadn't been able to ask that question until that moment where I was really, maybe I was detached to the identity that I thought I should keep on having. That I was a senior art director, I was working at Lego, I was this person that could this and that, and I was really identified with that. And all of a sudden I just saw that, even though I gave everything up, I was still alive. I could feel myself, I could breathe, and that was just a key moment that I just I was alive, even though I just said goodbye to everything.
Yeah. I mean, it's super powerful what you're saying, because I think, and this, I mean, it's a very potent and powerful question about, asking ourselves, what is it that we really want in our lives? Because so often, and what I'm hearing in your story, is that we could find ourselves almost living someone else's narrative.
Yeah.
So, people are telling you that this is how your narrative should be, given your condition. You could only work part-time, and this, and, to ask oneself, is it my narrative or is it someone else's? I think is a very powerful question and reflection for all of us.
Exactly. And I guess that what came out of that meeting with the municipality people there was actually that a couple of days after the meeting, I was really reflecting on what had happened there, and all of a sudden it just appeared to me that I needed to have some goal in my life. I needed to have, I was just walking around. I didn't know where to go, and I was basically lost. And I set up this goal for myself, and it was actually very simple. And it is, despite my disease, I want to live a happy life and be able to see possibilities instead of limitations. That's it. And when I just formulated that, I actually wrote it down so I could see it all the time. Everything just kicked off from there. So having some idea about where I want to go, and it was not bound in material goods. It was not, advancing at work. It wasn't, a new car. It wasn't. It was simply that I just wanted to get everything out of this life that I had, even though I am losing my vision. And that was. I think that's the rebirth of Morten. That moment. Yeah.
And once you articulated and crystallized this goal, then presumably you had to then maybe change some behaviors or change some old habits or old patterns and create new ones. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I had the goal now, and I basically, that I could see that I needed to somehow get there, but I couldn't find the way. I didn't know how to do it. I simply hadn't the capacity to do it. So I started reading a lot of books. I think that in a year, maybe you have been reading 26 books or something like that, really massively. So I learned a lot of things about the psyche. I learned a lot of things that I didn't know existed at all. And I think today that we should teach the children at school. And the first thing I really learned was that what I think all the time is actually what I become. So I had for so many years thought that I was a limited person. There were so many things I couldn't do. I was facing all these things every day because I couldn't, take away that I was handicapped by my vision. So I experienced it all the time in the canteen. I couldn't find the food. I would constantly turn over things and, idiot, now you did it again. So I realized that, by having this narrative in me that constantly was saying, yeah, you stupid blind guy, you did it again. So I was constantly picking on myself. So I learned a lot about how the conscious mind and the subconscious mind work. And I basically started just to reprogram the subconscious mind to be able to have the software in my subconscious mind to support having a happy life.
Can you share how you practically did that?
Yeah, I gave myself 4 challenges. I realized at one point I was reading a book by Alan Watts. He's a British philosopher.
Brilliant.
Yeah, and he said that you don't get wet from the word water, and that was just I understood it. You don't get to ride a bike by just reading about it. So I just knew I had to implement all the things that I was reading, so it didn't just become an idea. And in philosophy, it was something I had to live. So I gave myself 4 challenges that should show me that when I put my mind up to something, I can actually accomplish it. And the first task was, I said to myself, okay, the next 30 days, Morten, you have to be the most positive person in the whole world. And that was not something I was accustomed to, because I was basically always seeing problems and limitations. So, but for 1 month, I said, okay, you can do this in 1 month, and after 1 month, you can go back and be the old grumpy guy again if it doesn't if it doesn't work out. So in that month, I actually started, implement also mindfulness that I was doing a lot of, at home. For 20 minutes, you go into mindfulness, and then you go out of the mindfulness, and then you're back in your old, turmoil. And I basically started to notice things, simple things. When I was constantly complaining about having to spend 3 hours in the bus every day, 1.5 hour each way. And I said to myself when I was standing there in the rain with all the high school students, watching my neighbors go by in their big cars, and I was just complaining, and then say, "Oh, Morten, this is the 30-day happiness or positive month. You have to find something good about this." And then I started to think, okay, maybe it's a good thing that I have all this time to read now, and never have the time for that. You basically go from A to B, and that's the whole purpose, is just to get there. So now I started to really do something productive with the time that I had, and that was actually an eye-opener for me. But also at work, I was trying to implement it, and there were some funny moments. I remember once I would just, I do it constantly. I tip over a glass of water, and it, spills everywhere. And normally I would say, "Oh," I would swear, and I would do a lot of things. And then I just reminded myself, "Oh, oops!" And I just talked to myself as I was a 10-year-old boy. And I remember my colleague Malene. She almost spit out all the coffee she just put in her mouth. It sounded so weird, an adult man talking like that. But I think that those 30 days learned or taught me that the perspective that I put on my world is actually my own choice. So if it is my choice if I want to put a label on something that it is bad.
Yeah,
I could also put a label on it that it is good, and that is actually a choice.
And what impact did that have on you, either cognitively or emotionally? Just trying to be in this space of let's call it positivity or optimism.
Well, I think I learned that I can create a space around myself. I had reacted, and I talked a little bit about it before, about the subconscious mind, the autopilot, and it was just programmed to be, reactive in a negative way. So I learned that I actually can stop that impulse if I just be, if I'm mindful of the moment. So acknowledge what is happening right now. Something I didn't expect this, but I was able now to accept what was, without labeling it as a bad thing. So just decide, okay, maybe this is not a bad thing, that we have to do the whole campaign over again. Well, I love to do campaigns, so that I can just do it again. So,
but how did you cultivate the discipline? Because I think many of us, I certainly have experienced, I wake up some morning and say, okay, I want to be a nicer father or a nicer boss or better colleague. And maybe it lasts, for half a day or a day, and then my old patterns come back. So how did you cultivate that discipline?
Well, first it was a knowledge. I learned about how to change your behavior, or what do you call it? Habits, yeah, exactly. And that's why I put up a fourth challenge, that was I have to, in 4 months, give a talk about what I'm learning right now to all my colleagues, or some of my colleagues at Lego. So I knew that if I have to do that, I have to be really good at what I'm doing right now, because I had, always had this standards to myself. It needs to be excellent at all times. So I basically put some pressure on myself to be in this all the time. So not go back just watching a spaghetti western, and I was constantly bombarding myself with this. So it was a repetition thing. I think that I just kept on repeating this internally in my mind, and at a certain point, it just became second nature for me. And so I think when I got lazy, I was just thinking, oh, Morten, you have to. I have to talk about this in 4 months, so you cannot be lazy. You have to. And I also, of course, had the end goal that I wanted to be able to see possibilities instead of just turning my back against things that would arise. I would say, maybe I can't do it, or maybe people will notice that I can't see, and that will be embarrassing. So I guess that, repetition, it is basically what you have to do.
Yeah, but it's amazing. You've also established kind of a programmatic way of leading yourself. I mean, setting a clear goal and narrative for yourself around wanting to see possibilities versus limitations, then training your mind through mindfulness, and also training yourself, cultivating the habit of being more positive, and then setting that big goal of presenting, and one that presumably you couldn't say no to once you put it in the calendar.
That was there.
That's very inspiring.
Yeah.
So how did people around you react to the evolving Morten?
I thought about that actually, and I think that first thing was that the talk that I gave was a surprise to a lot of people, because after giving the talk, people came up to me and said, "Well, I thought you were going to talk about your disease," and I actually spent almost no time talking about that. The talk was more about how to go from, a locked position. You feel you don't, I'm stuck here. How do you get out of that position, and how do you liberate yourself from your thought patterns? And so people were kind of surprised about that. But I think also if you change really quickly, people also get a little frightened about it, because you're not doing what you're supposed to do. You're not doing what you normally are doing. So I think there's still a lot of people who look at it as why is he gone crazy, or is he's a little weird, and he talks about weird things. And so I think that people around me are just basically getting used to the new guy, I guess. But I'm only experiencing happiness around it, and people are happy about what I'm doing, and I think that I influence people around me with the positivity spirit. Sometimes you can actually turn around a negative vibe going on in a room by having this positive way of thinking. And,
absolutely. But I could attest to that, since I've only known the new Morten, and since we've met and had a number of very meaningful conversations, I've always left our interactions feeling much more expansive and energized and inspired. So I'm sure that's how other people feel, and how our listeners will feel as well. So Morten, you mentioned two of the four challenges. Can you just give us a little glimpse of the other two?
Yeah, well, the first one was the 30-day positive behavior, and the second one was I realized that I was constantly worrying about the future and what would happen in the future, and it was always a negative anticipation of it. So I said to myself one day, you have to do something that you clearly would never do voluntarily. So you have to do it. And I came up with the idea that I had to skydive, because I hate heights. That's the worst thing I know. And when I got that idea, I just said to myself, well, that's great. You have to do that. So
that's
I decided,
a bold move. That's a big challenge.
Yes. So I just wanted to experience how I would behave. I set my mind to do it in 14 days. I got the idea now. I have to do it within 14 days. And then I just wanted to see how I will react, how I will cope with it. And it actually taught me that the things that I fear, sometimes avoid, can actually end up being the best moments ever. So that was the second challenge. And the third challenge was that I was also limited by my own boundaries of what I felt that I could ask people. I didn't ask for help when I was in trouble with my visual impairment. And I just wanted to change that. So I said to myself, can you do something that is out of the ordinary, that people would look at and say, this man is clearly crazy? And then I decided I wanted to lie down on the sidewalk in a very busy place somewhere in a city and just count to 30 and just look up in the sky and enjoy it while people just walk around me. And I can tell from experience that is extremely difficult to do when you stand in front of doing it. But I actually did it, and what I learned from that was people don't really care. They just walk around you, and maybe they think, "Oh, this guy is clearly crazy" or something. But it taught me that sometimes when I feel I can't do it, I actually can do it anyway. It's just you have to make your mind and then do it. So that was,
and be brave.
Be brave, yeah, exactly. But also it sort of shattered my own view on what I think I can and can't. So, but also giving talks, I think that's a frightening thing to do, and now I just do it, and I have fun.
Which was one of your challenges as well, giving the big talk.
Exactly,
right?
That was the fourth one. So
fantastic, great. Well, I think if our listeners maybe pick up on one or two, that would already be a big step forward for many of us. So thanks for sharing those
Thank you.
4 challenges, Morten.
Great.
As we wind down, just a few more questions, maybe to try and sum up, if you can, what your biggest learning or lesson is around self-leadership.
Yeah. Well, it's a funny thing because I have never been interested in leadership. That's a funny thing. My work has always been like focused on being a specialist, and leading and talking about leadership has not been something that I normally did. But I all of a sudden became my own leader, and I realized that sometimes and often you're just your own biggest enemy in life. When you want to achieve something, there is always this, we talked about it, narrative that sort of, but Morten, do you think you should do that? And I think the most important lesson that I learned, actually, because I set this goal for myself that I wanted to be happy. What I really learned was that you setting up a goal like that, it's so important that every moment becomes just the yoo-hoo moment, and not being looking at a goal that should fulfill you somewhere in the future. So I basically learned to realize that every moment that I'm breathing, seeing things with a beginner's view, just was amazing. I could see so many things going on right now that was amazing, and I basically found happiness in things I was doing right now, and not a goal that was be in a year when I finally reached the goal. Now I will be happy. It's actually a state of mind, and it's a decision, I think, that now I want this. So you go for it and you find out how to achieve it. And I think that comes, when I talk about it and I give talks about this, I can see that there's so many things about what I'm talking about that is going back to being a leader.
Yeah.
But I'm just don't consider myself as a leader, but I'm leading myself, and I think that I set a positive.
Absolutely, and I think the lessons that you're sharing with us today are leadership lessons. I mean, how can anyone lead others and inspire others unless one can manage and lead oneself and find internal meaning and internal inspiration and the quality of our presence, which you're also talking about through some of your mindfulness or your beginner's mind approach. I mean, those are qualities of self-management that then impact the quality of our presence, and the quality of our presence influences our ability to influence and galvanize others. And I think you're demonstrating that in such a unique and powerful way.
Oh, thank you.
So last question, Morten. Leadership is about lifelong learning, and we're all on a journey, and you're clearly on a very meaningful journey. What, from your perspective, is your developmental edge in your own leadership journey? What are you driving towards, or what edge are you at in terms of your own development?
Well, actually, I think right now I'm just rediscovering the world. I touched upon it with this approach of the new beginner's mind. So I'm basically learning things that I thought I had learned many years ago. I'm relearning them. So I'm creating new opinions on things that I sort of made up my mind that I think this about this. So I think I read a really good quote once. I think the ambition to be open to everything but attached to nothing. That's really what I try right now to experience. Also, I think that my ambition right now is just to be a positive influence on people. That's why I enjoy giving talks, and feel that people can use what I'm talking about, and I can see that people grow, and people come up to me afterwards and say, "That was so great for me to hear your talk," and that gives me a lot of that gives everything a meaning.
Fantastic! That's really, really powerful. And a teacher, one of my teachers once said that if leadership was a bird, it would have two wings, and one wing is compassion, and the other wing is wisdom. And I think today you've shared so many different facets of compassion through your self-compassion, going through the process that you've gone through and dealing with your eye condition, And so much wisdom has come through your journey and what you shared today that I'm sure all of our listeners will benefit from that. So thank you very much, Morten. It was great to have you.
Thank you for having me.